Welcome, bienvenue, bonjour. We are so happy that you have gathered with us here tonight or from the comfort of your own home or wherever you may be streaming from this evening. And my name is Lynn. I will be your MC this evening, our first inaugural show of the series. I would also like to acknowledge that we are on Robinson-Huron Treaty territory of the Anishnaabe, Métis, and Inuit peoples. Well, See, there's always a little bit of a glitch with those types of situations, so not a problem. So now let me tell you a little bit more about Steeped in Stone series. It is so exciting because this is a series of 13 performances. Tonight is the first one. And it's going to showcase talent from the Algoma regions, from artists who have creativity and a uniqueness to offer all of us. Each is going to showcase a diverse lineup of talents, and they've inspired from stories, the culture, and the landscape of the region. While the theme may be steeped in stone, you can be assured that not one show is going to be alike, and that's what makes it so interesting, because you're not going to want to miss coming to as many of the shows as possible, or even streaming for free as well. Now, the audiences are going to be treated to music, theater, storytelling, poetry, performance art, and so much more, as well, of course, as heritage presentations that we will have at every one of the performances. So many stories to be told, many stories to be learned, and certainly so much history that is just going to enrich our lives. Let's get started. We have right here Kathy Fisher, and I'm going to let her tell us the first story.
Thank you, Lynn. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Kathy Fisher. I am the curator at the Ermatinger National Historic Site. First of all, I want to welcome you, because how many of you have been out like an event like this in 2 years, right? Right. And for those of you watching at home, join us next time. The tickets were sold out really fast. So the Old Stone House is a museum. It was purchased in 1965 by the city, mainly because one lovely lady, Gladys McNeese, pursued the city and relentlessly had them working on making it a museum and restoring it to the time of the Ermatingers. So in order to do that, she did a lot of research. She found that there is another Ermatinger house. It is a brother's in St. Thomas, Ontario, and another one from a cousin in Ohio. And through all of that, they found artifacts and items of the family that we have some and those other houses have some. And out of people's collections, like their own personal collections, things started to be donated. One is coming from the Moorhead estate, and it's today's story, Steeped in Stone. So I'd like to introduce you to an Ermatinger sword. And this sword, first of all, we know it's a captain's sword just because of the type of handle on it and the brass, and of course the crown. So the Ermatinger that used this was using it on behalf of the British. Now, what we don't know is it used by an Ermatinger for story 1 or an Ermatinger in story 2. And that's your decision this evening. So the first story is that it was an Edward Ermatinger, and he actually, they're all named Edward, Charles, James, and Frederick, and that's 7 generations. James Ermatinger, down in St. Thomas, Ontario, near that other place. Actually, we were told he used it, and on horse with his troops, protected our side at Pelee Island against the American troops and sympathizers. So that's why those of you drinking wine tonight, I chose Pelee Island wine. Now, story B is that it could have been Charles Jr., and he actually was one of the gentlemen that tried to actually get the deed to the house, to the old stone house, on behalf of his father and his parents. He came through here with Colonel Wolseley on his way to the Red River Rebellion in Manitoba, and we're told he might have used this sword in that battle and in order to claim Manitoba and be beside Louis Riel. So those are the two stories. We don't know which is true. We do know when we got it from the Moorhead Estate that it is an Ermatingers, and that's what we were told. We do also know those two stories are true, but we haven't quite figured out which one might be more true. So that's the story of the sword. Every one of these performances, we're going to give you a treat about a story steeped in stone, which is our motto here. And this one we thought might be a little more appropriate because these gentlemen are going to tell you some of those same stories through song. So thank you.
Heritage moment that you've presented to us. And one of the things before you go, of course, white gloves means a very special artifact. Now, is this one going to be on display here at the Discovery Center?
Eventually. It is not on display. It's been hidden away in the collection, and as you know, every one of the museums in Ontario and Canada and around the world during COVID, we found treasures. And so this was one of the ones we found. We've brought it down. It was in the attic. Anyways, it's now in our artifact and archival room here in this building, locked up, but we're hoping it'll soon be on display for everyone to see. But I don't know which story we're going to tell.
I'm sure you'll figure it out from now until then, no doubt.
Yeah.
Thank you again, Kathy, for this moment. Really appreciate you.
Thank you.
Now, of course, is the moment where I'd like to introduce you to our featured performers this evening, Joel Syrette and Peter White. We're so happy to have you with us. And before we hear more about Voices from the Gathering Place, first I'm going to ask you, Joel, how did you and Peter started to collaborate together?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'll say bonjour, animakibane shins nindugu, migazay nindotem, bautigongaskunaganing nindonjaba. And of course, you know, people that are, my elders always say that whenever we address somebody publicly, we always speak in our language. And of course, Peter and I, we're both educators, but we're at the polar opposite ends of our career. Peter was at the very tail end, and I was at the very beginning of mine. And of course, we started sharing some ideas about indigenizing curricula and music, and we had some really cool things we were working together at Peter's former school. And then, of course, we started talking music, and we started playing some music together in the Whiskey Barrel, and we started some projects. So. Yeah.
That's wonderful. And by the way, if you have not been to the Whiskey Barrel, those of you who reside in Sault Ste. Marie or joining us streaming, as soon as you find out when they'll be able to play again, you must go. Which actually reminds me as well, is you are also, you've got a world of richness in the form of music. And you have done some powwow singing. Can you tell us a little bit more about this?
Yeah, so growing up, I don't ever remember not powwow singing. All of my uncles, you know, sang on the drum. And of course, you know, my mom and my grandparents remember stories of busting up spoons and banging on pots and pans. And eventually my uncles decided that they better sit me down at the drum, and have been very fortunate to sing with some world-class singers in my time. And that's probably been the greatest musical influence in my time here as a musician.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Thank you very much. Now, Peter, over to you. What I'd like to know is that you have been composing and songwriting for over 40 years.
Yeah.
And so what, what have you enjoyed the most, if you wish?
About songwriting? Just about everything. The song coming is a very special moment. With this particular project, I was just researching history and no intention of writing music, but then found myself writing lyrics, and then the music just appeared. It's kind of great, and recording's a very fun process, and performing, so it's all in there.
That's wonderful. So what's been your inspiration for Voices from the Gathering Place?
Well, way back in, I guess around 2008 or 2007, I was cruising the internet, as we all do, and somehow I came across something called the Jesuit Relations. And I thought, what is this? And it was the reports that the Jesuit missionaries had to send back to France. And they were from the 1600s. And they were talking about Sault Ste. Marie. And I just couldn't believe it. And all these stories that I had no idea about, some of which we're going to hear about tonight. And one thing led to another, and there's all kinds of other sources, but that's kind of how the project came about.
That's wonderful. And before we turn it over to our musical show and performance this evening, I'd like to mention that Peter has CDs outside for sale, and it's the music, all kinds of music, is also available from, I believe, the Spotify, I should say.
Any music streaming service, you'll find my music, and the peterwhitewebsite.com. Do yourself a favor, just Google Peter White Sault Ste. Marie, and then it'll come up. I was blessed with a generic name, and there are a lot of Peter Whites.
Excellent. Well, without further ado, the Voices from the Gathering.
Welcome. And welcome home. Our first song is going to introduce you to many people from Sault Ste. Marie's past, and after that you'll get a deeper sense of some of these people and events in the songs that follow. After each song, my good friend Joel Syrette is going to share some of the oral history that has come down through in the Anishnaabe community about the same events. And here we go. From the salty sea, the Ojibwe came to the shores of Whitefish Island. From France came the voyageurs to sing, and fur traders in Matin. From out of the mist came the black coat priests with the cross and the name of Jesus. Then the redcoats came, and the words that soon echoed in the woods were English. Welcome home, every bird is singing. Welcome home, every tree is swaying. Welcome home, every river is an endless poem. Every rock and every stone has a voice all of its own, and I hear them saying, welcome home. These woods have felt the footprints of the ancestors of Shinguak. These waters heard the words of Etienne Brule as he talked. These clouds saw Father Juliet pray for sick Ojibwe families. These whitefish leaped into the nets of Alexander Henry. Welcome home, every bird is singing. Welcome home, every tree is swaying. Welcome Every rock and every stone has a voice all of its own. And I hear them saying, welcome home. This air has danced to the tune of the Irish accent of John Johnston. These trees have given sugar to his Chippewa wife Susan. These shores have heard the anger and the trials of John Tanner. These flowers sighed as Jane Schoolcraft wept for the son who'd left her. Welcome home. Every bird is singing, welcome home. Every tree is swaying, welcome home. Every river is an endless flow. Every rock and every stone has a voice all of its own. And I hear them saying, from the streets of Montreal came a young man named Ermatinger. From Sandy Lake he brought his wife, and he made a stone house for her. From the rolling hills of Scotland, Joseph Wilson brought his vision. From a dedicated, angry mind, Judge John Prince made decision. Welcome home. Every bird is singing, welcome home. Every tree is swaying, welcome home. Every river is an every rock and every stone has a voice all of its own. And I hear them saying, welcome home. Every rock and every stone has a voice all of its own. And I hear them saying, welcome home.
You know, so in that song, the line says, from the salty shores to Lake Superior came the Ojibwe. And you know, as Ojibwe people, we are known to other Anishnaabe as Ojibwe by our clothing, by some of our customs and our language. As Anishinaabe, we are ancient. We are tens of thousands of years old. And it's only recently that we begin to be known as Ojibwe. But in our oral history, there's a story of a migration where it says that the Anishinaabe would rise up and follow the path of the sacred Migas, what we know as a cowrie shell, into the place where food grows on water. And food that grows on water for us as Anishinaabe is what we know as minuman, or wild rice. So in the story, there are said to be 7 major stopping places on the migration. The first being somewhere near Montreal, the second around the Niagara Falls area, the third into somewhere around the Detroit River, the fourth into the Manitoulin Islands, the fifth being Bawating, being right here in Sault Ste. Marie, and then it's said the migration went onward to the Duluth area and then came back into Lake Superior and settled in the Apostle Islands. But at one time, Bawating, Sault Ste. Marie, was said to be the capital of the Anishinaabe Nation. And it's said that the whitefish were so plentiful in Sault Ste. Marie that you could walk from the shores on the Canadian side to the American side on the backs of the whitefish. And you know, we talk about stories steeped in stone. If you look around Sault Ste. Marie, every one of the buildings that you see with that kind of, kind of pale pinkish sand-colored stone, That's all sandstone that was taken from the rapids. And it's pretty impressive to think that it's only less than 15% of what it actually was at one time. But that's a little bit, of our oral history. This is a very special place. It's one of the very few year-round villages that we had as Anishinaabe people. And at one time, it was said to be the capital.
And now, a song about the man who built this old stone house. Charles Ermatinger was a fur trader, but he could not get his job done without the voyageurs. And they had a hard job, paddling 14 hours a day, carrying 180-pound packs across portages. And I'm told that even the staircase that still gets us to the second floor of the old stone house got here in the early 1800s by canoe.
A Montreal canoe, nonetheless, Peter.
Yes, all the way from Montreal. But these guys were happy characters, and one of their great secrets was the joy of singing. And we're kind of hoping that in the chorus of this next song, you will imagine yourself as a voyageur paddling 45 strokes a minute on your way from the Sault to Fort William, now Thunder Bay, and sing along. 1, 2, 3. Setting out from Montreal when he was 21 in 1798, far from the peaks of Switzerland. Charles Ermatinger was the name he took along as he paddled to his fate and sang this happy song. As he paddled to his fate, he sang this happy song. La 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 la. La 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 la. La 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 la. La 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 la. In a big birch bark canoe, he paddled till he ached, arriving that first winter in a place near Sandy Lake, to live with the Ojibwe and to trade for their pelts. All this he accomplished, and even something else. All this he accomplished, and even something else. He fell in love and married the daughter of the chief, all before the spring of '99 had sprung a leaf. He traveled far and wide like those fur traders do, and then he sang this song as he paddled to the Sault. Then he sang this song as he paddled to the Sault. Let's sing it. La 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 la. La 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 la. La 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 la. La 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 la. Charles and Mananoe made Sault Ste. Marie their home, raising many children inside this house of stone. Then a war came to be called in the year of 1812, and Ermatinger bade his wife and his children farewell. Ermatinger bade his wife and his children farewell. Charles was the captain of his 50 hired men. They joined soldiers, volunteers, and 300 Indians. They took Fort Mackinac without firing a shot. And as they paddled home, they sang this song a lot. As they paddled home, they sang this song a lot. They sang la 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 la. La 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 la. La 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 la. La 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 la. 2 years later, Charles had a pretty close call with soldiers who were on their way to take back Mackinac. They landed in the Sault and they set the place alight, and every man and woman started running for their life. Yes, every man and woman started running for their life. Only Charles remained standing firm on his land. And when he was approached, he said, "I'm just an honest man." The Americans decided they would leave his house alone. And as they sailed away, Charles sang this song. Yes,
As they sailed away, Charles sang this song. La 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 la.
Setting out for Montreal when he was 52, Charles and his family departed from the Sioux. It was a 5-week journey, and that seems very long. But for Charles Ermatinger, it was all too quickly gone. For Charles Ermatinger, it was all too quickly gone. As he sang,
La 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 la.
there we go.
La 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 la. You know, speaking of the old stone house, when I was little growing up, I heard a lot of stories from my grandma about the old stone house. And she talked about her dad, and her dad actually had stories. And the Anishnaabe people would often come up from Garden River, you know, and in the time of trading furs, and of course they did farming and stuff like that back then too. The place that they actually would dock their boats, she said, was actually the old stone house. And if we think about it, you know, Bay Street didn't exist. That's why it's called Bay Street, actually. It makes perfect logical sense, right? History is all around us. But, you know, there's been a long-standing history. And we think back, you know, in these stories steeped of stone, the land probably looked very different. Our customs were very different. But always interesting to see how these pieces of history have managed to survive and be passed down through the generations.
Well, now we're going to take the I-75 south for an hour to one of the other great fur trading centers that was mentioned in the last song, Fort Mackinac. And may I ask, has anyone ever been to Mackinac Island for the fudge, bicycles, bike trails, and the great fort up in the hill? This song is not about that Fort Mackinac.
It's about Fort Mackinac.
Yes. In 1763, Fort Mackinac was on the mainland. And in that fort, on June 2nd, was a young fur trader named Alexander Henry, who, with the help of an Ojibwe, barely escaped with his life from the massacre at Mackinac. Oh, people, come gather round. I'm gonna tell you how it all went down. Oh, people, go tell your friends Alexander Henry is alive again. Take a walk with me, 1763, when danger filled the air with fear. Rumors from Fond du Lac about Chief Pontiac and plans to make the British disappear. I had come down from the Sioux to the fort at Mackinac. It was the second day of June as the natives played lacrosse. Massacre at Mackinac. Massacre at Mackinac. Massacre at Mackinac. than one warned Major Etherington that something more was on than sport. He brushed aside the words, and soon everyone heard the ball come flying deep into the fort. I was sitting in my room, writing letters to my friends, when I looked out of my window, all I saw were dead Englishmen. Massacre at Mackinac. Massacre at Mackinac. Massacre at Mackinac. Oh, people, what can I say? Things went south in the north that day. Oh, people, knock on some wood, 'cause right now things aren't looking so good. It was 1 year before Wawatam, a Chippewa embraced me as his brother and a son. For he had dreamed a dream that in a man like me was seen, that he must treat that man as if his own. The day before the great attack, he tried to take me back to the Sioux. Not understanding, I ignored his words of warning, and next thing I knew, massacre at Mackinac. Massacre at Mackinac. Massacre at Mackinac. I heard Jemay scream between a warrior's knees, and I watched that fighter shear off his reward. Another reached into a man while cupping bloody hands and drank a toast to death forevermore. I was hidden by a slave. Soon enough, I was found. I was sure that all was lost. I would soon be underground. In that moment there appeared my new brother, what? He gave the chief all that he had to buy my life, my freedom. From the massacre at Mackinac. Massacre at Mackinac. Massacre at Mackinac. Oh, people, come gather round. I'm gonna tell you how it all went down. Oh, people, go tell your friends Alexander Henry is alive again.
You know, so there's a whole lot of history in that particular song. The one thing that I often wonder is, you know, Alexander Henry has these amazing stories. You know, historical accounts will say there were 300 warriors, and Alexander Henry would say there were 3,000, right? But if you think, he was the ultimate traveling salesman, and his reputation probably preceded him. But in there, it talks about adoption. His brother, a man that had a vision that took him on as his brother, and when he appeared, he actually gave a substantial, dowry, quite a bundle to the chief to spare Alexander Henry's life, and he's probably fortunate because otherwise he probably would have had his head cut off. But in that particular song, what people don't know about this battle, right? And history has an interesting way of talking about great victory versus massacre. And any time the indigenous people seem to win, it's always touted as a massacre, right? But in the story, we have a game in this area that we traditionally play. Does anybody know what Canada's national sport is? Lacrosse, yes. This is actually a really keen group. Yeah, lacrosse is actually Canada's national summer sport. And it's noted that the Haudenosaunee, the Iroquois tribes, played lacrosse, and of course the way their stick looked, the bishops and the Jesuits called it lacrosse because it looked like a bishop's staff. Well, Ojibways also played that game, but we called it bugadaway. And our sticks actually were smaller and required a lot more skill to actually catch the ball and shoot the ball. And I can say that because I am Ojibwe and I am also Mohawk. So Ojibways do it better, in my opinion.
Another place like Mackinac that we haven't been able to go for 2 years is Bay Mills, Michigan, and a lovely museum lighthouse there at Iroquois Point. Well, this song will tell you how, in 1662, Point Iroquois got its name. Way back in a time when a Manitou sign was the word that showed the way. Just north of the Sioux, 1662, the Sault Ste. Ojibway fell on their enemy with such ferocity that the foes they never foresaw that the place of their bones would forever be known by the name Point Iroquois. Oh, oh, the name Point Iroquois. Oh, oh. Back in those days, the Ojibways lived in fear of the Iroquois tribe. They always came around for a chance to hunt down whoever forgot to hide. A woman and a man of the Garden River Band took their kids down to the shore, when like an eagle's cry, those Iroquois swooped down like a cry of war. Oh, 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 swooped down with the cry of war. Oh, oh. Long ago, in the homeland of the Crane, whoa, ho, ho, Point Iroquois got its name. Some Ojibwe scouts went looking about for the ones who disappeared. At Sault Ste. Marie on a hill they could see the very sight all had feared. When the scouts returned, a war party soon gave chase the very next dawn. When they reached the Sioux, they paddled on through, for the Iroquois had moved on. Oh, oh, the Iroquois had moved on. Oh, they found them again at the point open as they entered Superior. The Ojibwe saw as the Iroquois went further up the south shore. The Garden River Band had a medicine man who told them the Manitou sign. At dawn's first crack they would attack and revenge the terrible crime. Oh, oh, revenge the terrible crime. Oh. Long ago, in the homeland of the Crane, whoa, oh, oh, Point Iroquois got its name. The next morning came with a shower of rain, and they pulled down the enemy's tents. With clubs and guns the work was done, all at the Iroquois' expense. But when the sun had set, there were just two left who were sent to their kin back home to tell them that they better never come back to the place of the Iroquois bow. The place of the Iroquois bow. Well, the years went by as the eagle eye of the Ojibwe looked all round. But day or night there was no sight of an Iroquois to be found. They were safe outdoors from the cry of war. They were safe inside their homes. And everyone knew just north of the Sioux was the place of the Iroquois bow. The place of the Iroquois bow. Long ago, in the homeland of the Crane, whoa, oh, Iroquois got its name. Whoa, in the homeland of the Crane, whoa, oh, Iroquois got its name.
You know, so interestingly with that song, it hits kind of close to home. You know, as Anishnaabe, Haudenosaunee, as an Ojibwe, you know, my relatives who know that I'm Mohawk, they say, oh yeah, you know, when the Mohawks came up here, we kicked their butts and we sent them back down to Mohawk territory. And you know, when I was living down in Haudenosaunee territory, they said, oh yeah, you're part Ojibwe. Well, we went up north and we fought against the Ojibways and the Algonquians and, you know, we smoked them, we rocked them, right? So everybody has an interesting way in talking about this history. But when I was little growing up, you know, my grandma told me an interesting story. And the story goes is that the Mohawks made their way up and they got as far as Garden River. And keep in mind, they had been stopping at all of these communities along the way and, you know, really wreaking havoc. They were noted for being very fierce in military combat and in war and that sort of thing. And of course, oral history tells us that there are actually people trapped inside of Trap Rock. That's why it's called Trap Rock. And of course, you know, the Haudenosaunee were the ones that had done that. But of course, what I was told is that they had a spiritual practitioner, you know, what we would know as they might call him a shaman, or we would call him a spiritual practitioner or a medicine person, probably somebody who could do a Jisakan ceremony. And of course, they got word over to the Anishinaabe people that were over in Ganojakaning, over in Bay Mills. They told them that the Mohawks were coming. So of course, what the Ojibwe did is they flipped over all their canoes on the beach. Many hid under their canoes. And then of course, beyond the shoreline in the bush, you know, the Anishinaabe waited. And when the Mohawk canoes hit the beach, they were outnumbered quite significantly. And as the story goes, and of course there's, you know, nothing pleasant about war, but they defeated the Mohawks and they cut all of their heads off. And of course they lined them up on the beach. And they left one alive. And of course what I was told is they cut his hands off and they told him to go back to your people and never return to this area. And of course, oral history tells us that on that beach, and this is true, if you go there, you can find all of these red stones on this beach. And our elders tell us that that's a reminder of the blood that was actually spilled there in that battle. Now, we'll find out later, you know, Peter in his research says that 2 were left. And of course, they cut the ears off instead of the hands. And, you know, I kind of believe that because it's probably easier to make it home without your ears as opposed to your hands. But what's amazing is that this piece of history, you know, was told to me by my grandmother, interestingly enough, who is the great-great-granddaughter of Chief Shinguak. And in spite of having gone through a residential school, you know, that history still manages to be told in our communities. It's still here, and that's from the 1600s.
Well, back in 2009, when I recorded this album, I asked an Anishnaabe musician to play in a few songs, but it just didn't work out. So I did my best to emulate the sound of traditional Anishnaabe music in songs like this next one, but I'm thrilled tonight to have Joel with me to give us a little taste of the real thing in this song about Chief Shinguak and a vision he had as a boy. 2, 3, In a birch bark lodge in the wintertime, a little boy quietly cried. He was hungry, sleepless, he was all alone when the wind blew the door aside. Then a voice called, "Poor Shinguakons, you are wretched, come to me." Then a path appeared, hovering there, from his bed to the sky it did lead. Climbed that path and found a man. Look to the sun was his command. Saw tents and kings and chiefs and braves and warriors strong. In the war council they gathered in the field, and to be with them he longed. Then the white-robed man said, "Shinguakons, you are young, persecuted and poor. So I give this picture to your heart, so you can always be sure that I will always think of you. One day you will be mighty too." Everything must change, you must understand the game, you must leave a little flame burning strong for those you love. Everything must flow, you must shape how it will go, and then leave behind a fire when you're gone. For those you love, to keep them warm. The man gave Shinguak a fluttering flag, and the boy began to walk down the path all lined with fluttering flags. He walked in mighty triumph. At last he reached his own little bed. Then a cold wind did blow. The boy woke up, everything was gone, but his heart remained aglow. From that day on he loved the sun, and the man who said what he'd become.
You know, so what's really interesting about this particular piece is the historical writings are from a book called Kichigame. And it's a pretty interesting read. You have to really go through the times, you know, when you look at that particular piece. And of course, he has a really interesting way of describing things of the time, right? They talk about, you know, the temple wigwam and all this type of stuff.
And all this from a German.
A German, yeah.
Who decided to come and live with the Ojibwe around Lake Superior for a year.
But in that vision of Shinguak, you know, it sounds like one of the many ceremonies that he had gone through. And through this process of fasting and through visions, Shinguak actually rose to prominence in this area and became a leader. He was a veteran of the War of 1812 and actually signed the treaty in a particular year on, you know, the behalf of the Ojibwe people here for Garden River. But what's really interesting is our oral history tells us, you know, when we look at some of his garments from the War of 1812 in particular, you can see musket holes in there. And of course, people asked Shinguak, you know, like, how were you not shot or slain on the battlefield? And his response was, well, you can't kill a spirit, you know, and it speaks to the mystery that surrounds Shinguak. And of course, you know, as I talked about my grandmother, that actually happens to be her father's father's father. She was a great-granddaughter of Chief Shinguak.
Now, speaking of the treaty, retired school teacher, I can't stop asking questions. I just have to do this. And can anyone tell me when the treaty for this area was signed, it covered all the First Nations down the coasts of Lake Superior, all the First Nations down the coast of Lake Huron? Anyone? They're not going to guess.
1850.
And why, you ask yourself, I'm sure, was it signed in 1850? Well, it all started on November 14th, 1849. 2, 3, On December 14th, 1849, came a knock on the company door. It was 4 in the morning at the Mica Bay mine on the Lake Superior shore. Bonner was the name of the company man, and he didn't seem too surprised to see Alan MacDonald and Chief Little Pine with their friends and their guns and knives. It was windy and cold on November 14th, it was 1849, when Little Pine and Alan MacDonald shut down all the digging at the Mica Bay mine. Little Pine's name was Shinguakons. He was the chief of the Garden River Band, and he led his braves from the pseudo Mica Bay, 'cause the miners were on his land. Now he didn't just get out of bed that day and decide to take over a mine. He'd asked and asked for a treaty, but no treaty makers could he find. Alan MacDonald was a lawyer who came up north to get a mine for himself, but the greed of others made him feel ashamed, so he offered Little Pine his help. Or maybe he did it 'cause another MacDonald helped the Highlanders across the sea. Whatever the reason, the attorney decided to offer his expertise. It was windy and cold on November 14th, it was 1849, when Little Pine and Alan MacDonald shut down all the digging at the Mica Bay mine. When daybreak came at the Mica Bay mine, the workers and the families heard Bonner say, "Look at this pretty sunshine, and by the way, we're about to leave." 2 days later, 160 people felt the north wind blow. They sailed on a schooner bound for the Sioux as Little Pine watched them go. Lord Elgin was the Governor General then, and when he was told the tale, he sent Captain Cooper and a rifle brigade to engage and to prevail. They were rolling right along till Superior's waves and winds really started to sing. Violent gales of November turned them back to the Sioux, where they'd have to wait until spring.
It was windy and cold on November 14th. It was 1849. When Little Pine and Alan MacDonald shut down all the digging at the Mica Bay mine.
On December the 4th, 1849, 8 men turned themselves in. Shinguak and MacDonald and 6 other guys were jailed in Toronto, and then, well, they were released and sent back home when the Chief Justice decreed that since MacDonald was his relative, they'd been arrested illegally. Some papers said it out, Little Pine was a veteran of the War of 1812. Some papers said the mining wasn't right, but then you can't unring a bell. With all of these papers talking up a storm, Elgin had to get a treaty man. He appointed Bill Robinson, who then made a deal with the Garden River Band.
It was windy and cold on November 14th. It was 1849. Little Pine and Alan MacDonald shut down all the digging at the Mica Bay mine. So, you know, in that particular piece, one of the things that we have a long-standing history with as Anishnaabe is copper. And of course, in the earlier story of the migration, you know, when the Ojibwe people arrived in the shores of Lake Superior around the Madeline Island, they found a piece of what we call native copper, a piece of raw copper. And of course, history tells us that they pounded this piece of copper into a medallion and they would carve a notch. And a person would carry that for their entire lifetime. And then when they would pass away, they would pass it on to the next person. And of course, you know, they would carve the next notch. So on one of those notches, there appears to be the head and a hat. And of course, you know, we believe that to be the time when Europeans arrived in the Great Lakes and the Anishinaabe had met Europeans for the first time. But if we count back every single notch, and we estimate the average lifespan to be 50 years, only 50 years, the latest that the Ojibwe would have been in the Great Lakes was the 1390s. But of course, we know that the lifespan was significantly longer in those years, so we estimate it was much longer. But you know, talking about copper, here we are in 2022, and we're still at the point of settling the Robinson-Huron Treaty Annuities case. So if you have any interest, you can go to robinsonhuronwawindamagewin.com or simply Google Robinson-Huron Treaty.
And just to point out, the Mica Bay mine was a copper mine, which was particularly egregious because the mineral was sacred to the Anishnaabe. And regarding the treaty and the annuities that Joel is talking about, The deal in the treaty was that each member of the band would get $1 a year, and in return for what was being extracted from the ground, like the Mica Bay mine copper. And if Canada continued and flourished and extracted a lot more, then that would be increased. They increased it once at the end of the 1800s to $2, and it has stayed that number to today. And so this case is before the courts. It's a bit of a problem. Well, Joel and I have had a wonderful time being here with you tonight. Thank you for sharing this time with us and having a visit with all these people from, all these voices from the gathering place.
And of course, ladies and gentlemen, the man who wrote the songs himself, my good friend, Mr. Peter White.
And the man who played guitar and told us the story, Joel Syrette.
Thank you, Chimigwech. And my goodness, first of all, I have learned so much this evening. I actually think that, well, you definitely would have made an impression, you continue still, as educators, and I just wish that you would have been my history teachers. The stories that we've heard, the whole history that we were all able to experience this evening is so uplifting, and your stories, the music, thank you so much for being a part of this very first series this evening. Once again, let's give it up to Peter and Joel. Now, before I let you go, there's a few things that I would like to acknowledge. First of all, before I forget, is on your tables are little lists of all of the performances that are upcoming. So make sure you take that home. And there you go. Perfect. And as Kathy has mentioned a little bit earlier, is the nice intimate gatherings that we have here this evening are going to be repeated for each of the performances in the show. So if you want to book tickets, do it as soon as possible. You don't have to wait for each session. Take a look and see what each of the performer and each talent is going to be presenting you. The next one is going to be Cindy Ellen Crawford, who is going to, and I'm going to look at my notes to make sure I give you the right date, the 14th of April. And she will be speaking of a sense of place. And that's one not to be missed as well. Now, before we also close, let's show our appreciation for the Friends of Ermatinger Clergue Historical Site for sponsoring this series in partnership with Theatre in Motion. And thank you again for gathering with us here tonight. I'm sure you enjoyed the show just as much as we did, and we hope to see you again. Thank you.
One final thing, folks. If you have any interest, Peter and I are also in the process of, we have a podcast. And if you go to theborderline.ca, you can actually listen to the episode around Point Iroquois, where Peter and I talk about it in about a 90-minute episode. And we have future episodes going into production. So also follow the Voices from the Gathering podcast.
Excellent. Thank you. If everyone just stays seated, I'm going to turn the house lights up, and you'll be able to see your way.
That's good.
This was amazing. Oh my gosh, this was so